The first thing I remember is the sound. A deep, rhythmic chopping that vibrated through the foundation of the house and rattled the windows in their frames. On our quiet, manicured street, it was the sound of an invasion. Black Suburbans had materialized from nowhere, blocking the road, and men in sharp suits with coiled earpieces moved with a purpose that turned the blood cold. One of them stood by an open door, his eyes locked on me. He didn't look at me like my family did, with pity or confusion. He looked at me with mission-critical urgency. He didn't use my name. He used my designation. Oracle, we have to go, he said, his voice cutting through the rotor wash. Air Force One is wheels up in 20... On the porch, my family was frozen, their faces a perfect sculpture of disbelief and raw terror. But that moment of reckoning wasn't how the day began. 2 hours earlier, it began with me trying to make myself as small as possible in my parents' kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of catered food and my sister's perfume. It was a party for her, of course. It was always for her. My sister, Jessica, a newly minted senior vice president at a top marketing firm, was a woman who thrived on being the gravitational center of our family's universe. And my parents, two people who equated success with job titles and stock options, were her willing planets. They viewed my 10 years in the Air Force and my current, vaguely defined government job as a strange detour, a phase I would hopefully outgrow for something more stable, more understandable. Then came the toast. Jessica stood in the center of the living room, holding her champagne flute high. To new beginnings, she announced to her adoring audience. Her eyes found me hiding by the counter, and a sly smile touched her lips. And let's not forget my little sister Chloe, still plugging away at her government job. So mysterious. The crowd gave a polite, knowing chuckle. Saving the world one spreadsheet at a time, I bet. My father, bless his heart, patted my arm with a familiar, dismissive weight. We're just glad you're safe behind a desk now, honey. No more running around in that uniform. The comment was a tiny, sharp jab in a long history of them. A mental ledger filled with minimized achievements and misunderstood sacrifices. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a normal notification. It was a low, insistent hum against my palm, a vibration I was trained to recognize instantly. I glanced down, and the world of champagne and laughter faded into a dull roar. The insult from my sister, the pity from my father. It all collided with the encrypted alert on my screen. This wasn't just family drama anymore. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. Their perception of me as a harmless failed paper pusher wasn't just insulting. It was a liability they couldn't possibly comprehend. Jessica's laughter echoed in the kitchen. My father's pitying smile was like a knife. They thought I was a failure. They had no idea. They were mocking the one person the President of the United States was about to personally summon. To understand how a presidential motorcade ended up on their quiet street, you have to understand the two lives I was forced to live. Living these two lives required a kind of internal balancing act that had become second nature. One life was the story my family told themselves about me, and the other was the one I actually lived. The contrast was never sharper than at a family dinner about a year ago. The entire evening was a shrine to my sister Jessica, who had just gotten engaged. She held out her hand, and the diamond on her finger caught the light, instantly becoming the center of the universe. My parents were ecstatic, their voices a flurry of excitement about dates, venues, and guest lists. The ring was tangible, a brilliant symbol of the future they had always wanted for one of their daughters, a future they could understand and brag about. Later that evening, when there was a brief lull in the wedding talk, I tried to share a piece of my own life. I mentioned, quietly, that I had been awarded the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for my work on my last deployment. I didn't expect a parade, but I thought, maybe a moment of genuine interest. My mother, a woman who valued pleasantness above all else, smiled politely. "Oh, that's lovely, dear," she said, her eyes already drifting back to Jessica. A second later, she was asking about floral arrangements. The medal, a heavy piece of metal that represented months of sleepless nights and life-or-death decisions, was treated like a participation trophy from a school spelling bee. In their world, a diamond for a promise outweighed a medal for service. It was another entry in the long, silent ledger I kept in my head. My other world couldn't have been more different. It was a world of silence, security, and immense weight. It was a world that existed inside a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a sterile room deep inside the NSA, shielded from any and all outside signals. There were no family photos here, no small talk. Here, I wasn't Chloe, the disappointing daughter. Here, I was Oracle, and here, I had a purpose they could never comprehend. I was standing in front of my direct superior, General Matheson, a pragmatic and deeply intelligent 3-star general who had handpicked me for his unit. He didn't see a quiet young woman, he saw, as he put it, a strategic weapon. My team and I were running a red team exercise for something called Project Chimera, a national cybersecurity protocol that was supposed to be impenetrable. I spoke calmly, but with an authority that didn't exist for me outside these walls. I outlined the asymmetric threat vectors we'd uncovered, the cognitive warfare vulnerabilities that had been completely overlooked by the original designers. I pointed to a single line of code on the massive, glowing screen. Here, I said, this is the flaw. It's a backdoor that looks like a data verification handshake. With it, you could bring down the entire eastern seaboard's power grid in under 7 minutes. The room was dead silent. A dozen other experts had signed off on this protocol, declaring it secure. They had all missed it. General Matheson stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked at me, his eyes holding no praise, only a grim, profound respect. Your analysis is the only thing standing between us and a digital Pearl Harbor, he said, his voice low. The White House is being briefed on your findings now, Oracle. That was my reality. A reality of immense consequence, lived in the shadows. But then I would go home, and the shadows would be replaced by the blinding glare of their ignorance. I remember my mother sitting me down in the kitchen not long after that, her face etched with genuine concern. Chloe, she began, Jessica's company is hiring. They have a lovely communications department. You were always a good writer. I just stared at her, the words, Digital Pearl Harbor, echoing in my mind. It's so much more straightforward, she continued, wringing her hands. Your father and I just worry. This government work seems to have no real future, no ladder to climb. She was trying to help. She was trying to pull me toward a life she understood, a life measured in promotions and corner offices. She had no idea I was already at the top of a ladder she couldn't see, in a world she couldn't imagine. The conversation wasn't malicious, it was worse. It was a constant, grating reminder that to them, my entire existence was a mistake that needed correcting. The weight of it was exhausting. I just nodded and said I'd think about it, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. For years, I had built a firewall between my two worlds. I let them have their narrative. But their mockery wasn't just insulting anymore, it was dangerous. They believed I was weak, and that belief could get people hurt. It was time to decommission the firewall. I excused myself from the party, the sound of forced laughter and clinking glasses fading behind me as I walked down the hall. I went into my old childhood bedroom, a room that felt like a museum of a person I no longer was. The walls were still covered in faded posters and a few dusty academic awards that had once made my parents moderately proud. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the alert on my phone again, the screen a stark, brutalist contrast to the soft nostalgia of the room. The alert was an activation of something called Protocol Nightingale. It wasn't a request, it was a directive. Protocol Nightingale is a continuity of government contingency, designed for the immediate overt extraction of a single, irreplaceable asset during a Level 1 crisis. It's a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. And it gives the asset a choice. Confirm the safest and most expedient extraction point. The logical, anonymous choice would be a secure runway at Andrews Air Force Base. I could be there in 30 minutes, and no one would ever know. But the protocol allows for an asset's primary residence if it expedites the timeline, if it cuts through red tape. And my family home, the place where my very existence was red tape, was listed as my primary residence. A plan formed in my mind, not born of rage, but of a cold, clear logic. This was not revenge, I told myself. Revenge is emotional. This was a correction, a procedural adjustment. I would follow the directive to the letter, executing a national security protocol in the most efficient way possible. The fact that the most efficient option would have a very public, very personal side effect. That was merely a secondary consequence. I was simply leveraging the system they refused to understand. My world ran on rules, and I was about to enforce them. I opened my secure messaging app. My fingers moved with deliberate, steady precision over the keypad, my face illuminated by the cold blue light. My thumb hovered over the screen for only a second before I typed out the confirmation, each letter a nail in the coffin of their narrative. I was no longer enduring their world. I was forcing it to collide with mine. The message was sent. Almost instantly, the phone buzzed again. It was a secure call, the caller ID showing only a string of numbers. I answered. The voice was the crisp, no-nonsense tone of General Matheson's aide. Oracle, confirming Nightingale extraction at a civilian residence. Is the location secure? I looked around my childhood room, at the life they thought I was living, and a quiet, icy calm settled over me. Affirmative, I said, my voice perfectly steady. The location is clear. I'll be ready. There was a pause. Understood, the aide replied. The National Security Advisor is en route to Andrews to meet you. He's coming personally. The final piece clicked into place. I hit send. The confirmation was instantaneous. They had spent my entire life making me feel small in their world. I just invited the most powerful force in my world to their front door. The party was over. I returned to the party, my decision a cold, heavy stone in my gut. I stood by the door to the patio, watching my sister, Jessica, hold court. She was laughing, recounting some triumph at her firm, and her audience of friends and family hung on every word. The party was winding down, leaving behind that lazy, self-satisfied hum of a successful social event. That's when I heard it. It was faint at first, a single lonely siren wailing in the distance. I was probably the only one who noticed. But then it was joined by another, and then another, a chorus of urgency that grew steadily closer, tearing through the quiet suburban evening. Lights began to flash against the neighbors' houses, painting the street in strobing blues and reds. Jessica stopped mid-sentence, annoyed. "What is all this?" she asked, peering out into the darkness. "Honestly, did someone call the cops over the noise? How embarrassing." My father, his face set in a look of indignation, straightened his shirt and marched toward the front door, ready to give some local officer a piece of his mind. I watched him pull the door open, and then he just froze. The indignation on his face melted away, replaced by a slack-jawed, primal fear. His eyes were wide, fixed on something outside. The street was no longer our street. It was a federal staging ground, swarming with state police and men in dark suits with earpieces. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding me. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What is going on?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because at that moment, the door of the lead car, a black sedan that was clearly not a police cruiser, swung open. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out, flanked by two other agents. He moved with an unhurried, absolute authority that seemed to bend the world around him. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a politician. He was something else entirely. He was the National Security Advisor. He strode past the police barricade, past my gawking neighbors, his gaze fixed on our front porch. He ignored my terrified father, my bewildered mother, and my stunned sister. He ignored everyone. His eyes found me. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was low and calm, yet it cut through the air with the force of a command. "Oracle," he said. Just that one word, my call sign, sucked all the air from my sister's lungs. The first blow had landed. "We have a developing situation with Project Chimera," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. The project's name, a word of immense and classified importance, was the second blow. It was a password to a world they never knew existed. He then held out a slim, hardened briefcase. "The president is waiting for your brief." That was it. The final, shattering blow. The mention of the president, delivered not as a boast but as a simple statement of fact, was the irrefutable proof that dismantled their entire reality. It was the end of the world as they knew it. I saw it happen in slow motion. The wineglass slipped from Jessica's fingers, shattering on the stone patio with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Her mouth was hanging open, her carefully constructed mask of superiority utterly destroyed, leaving only raw, uncomprehending shock. My father's face had drained of all color. He looked from the advisor to me and back again. I could see 2 decades of condescension, of pitying smiles and dismissive pats on the arm, crashing down on him all at once. He didn't look angry. He looked utterly broken, like a man who just realized the foundation of his entire life was a lie. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. There was no triumph in me, only a deep, profound sense of correction. I gave a single crisp nod to the advisor. "I understand," I said. "I'll get my coat." I turned and walked past my frozen family, my footsteps the only sound in their shattered world. As I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, I looked back at them one last time. My mother was clutching my father's arm, her face a mess of tears and confusion. Jessica was just staring at me as if she'd never truly seen me before. I paused at the threshold, my new life waiting for me on the other side. "I have to go to work," I said, and the simple words carried all the weight of the worlds between us. My sister had built her entire world on job titles and org charts. In a single moment, she had just been introduced to a level of the org chart she never even knew existed. As the heavy car door closed, it sealed off the world of flashing lights and gaping neighbors, replacing it with the quiet, climate-controlled hum of government business. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. In my mind's eye, I could see my family standing on the porch, suddenly small and insignificant, frozen in the ruins of the reality they had built. Inside the car, the National Security Advisor had already opened the hardened briefcase. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't mention the chaos we'd just left. He simply started the brief. The transition was seamless, absolute. In the space of a single breath, I left the world where I was a footnote and re-entered the one where I was the subject of the sentence. 1 week later, the crisis was over. The flaw in Project Chimera had been patched, the threat neutralized. I found myself standing on a rug woven with the seal of the President of the United States in the center of the Oval Office. The air in that room is different, heavy with the weight of history and decisions that shaped the globe. The President, a man I had only ever seen on television, was sitting behind the resolute desk. He looked at me not with the awe of an outsider, but with the profound, weary gratitude of someone who truly understood the stakes. "General Matheson told me you were the best," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the immense authority of his office. He understated the truth. "The country is in your debt, Chloe." He used my name, not my call sign. In that moment, the validation wasn't for Oracle, the asset. It was for Chloe, the person. It was a sign of respect so total and so personal that it dwarfed every single slight I had ever endured. The internal ledger I had kept for so long. It simply vanished. There was nothing left to count. The debt had been paid in full, not by them, but by me. I had finally earned the one thing I'd stopped trying to get from my family: unconditional acknowledgement. It turned out I had just been looking for it in the wrong place all along. My new reality solidified in the weeks that followed. I wasn't just a member of a team anymore. I was asked to lead. My new office was on the top floor of a building that didn't officially exist, with a view overlooking the monuments of Washington, D.C. The nameplate on the door was simple, elegant, and carried more weight than any title my sister could ever achieve. It read, "Cognitive Warfare and Asymmetric Threats. C. Thorne, Director." My team was a small group of the sharpest analysts I had ever met, people who spoke my language, who understood the stakes without explanation. They were my peers. They were my real family, a family founded not on obligation or shared blood, but on mutual respect and quiet competence. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a threat matrix from Eastern Europe, my personal phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. It had been silent for weeks. I picked it up. It was a long text message from Jessica. "Chloe, I had no idea," it read. "None of us did. I am so sorry for everything, for how we treated you. I was wrong. We were all so wrong. Can we please talk?" I read the words over once, twice. The apology I had once craved, the one I would have given anything to hear, was finally here. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even a sense of victory. Just a quiet, calm distance. My peace was no longer a negotiation. It was no longer dependent on their approval or their remorse. It was mine, bought and paid for. I held my finger over the screen for a moment, then simply archived the message without replying. I put the phone down, turned back to the glowing map on my screen, and got back to work. My family spent my whole life waiting for me to get a real job. I just never realized my real job was making sure they had a world to have their jobs in.